Good morning. If this is your first session of the day, welcome. Congratulations on waking up and getting out of bed by mid-morning, which sometimes I feel like is a stretch during conference weeks. We've all hit that midday stride. And if this is your second session of the day, then great. Good on you for getting out of bed early and making it in, which is also tough in conferences like this that have a lot of really cool things going on. So today, we are going to talk about hiring processes. And so a little bit of introduction. If this is your first Denver Startup Week event, welcome. We are sponsored by Capital One and Dell Technologies and the Downtown Denver Partnership and some other people who are on this sign up here. So if you're curious about who these are, we're grateful that they gave this event a bunch of money so that we can all attend for free. They've also conveniently given us, we might have eaten all the donuts in the back. Sorry, there are no more donuts. If you wish there were more donuts, talk to your organizations about giving money to Denver Startup Week next year so we can have donuts at every session. Processes. Good morning. All right, so who am I? I am Jessie Berg. I'm the founder of Outgrow Your Garage, which we'll talk about a little bit through this presentation. I'm a serial entrepreneur. So my background is actually in landscaping, urban farming, and seasonal work. And then I ended up in business development by way of being frustrated about the way that process and operations operate in a lot of the businesses that I was working in. And then when I launched my own landscaping company, I discovered that nobody really talks about how to run a business that isn't industry specific, right? It's hard to find resources for a business that really work for you. And as a small business, I found it was extremely difficult to find resources that fit within my budget. Once I outgrew the free power hours at Commons on Champa, this free marketing webinar somebody was putting on, but I hadn't gotten enough money to hire a business coach. So really filling in that gap. So that was how I ended up moving businesses. I advocate a lot for small businesses. And I really like to focus on systems. What are systems that work for small business owners? What are systems that work for new business owners? How do you get through that stage of business where you know a lot about what your business does and very, very little about how to run a business? And every week you get burned by something you didn't know you needed to know, and it would have been really helpful if you knew that last week. That phase of business growth is brutal. And I also believe that entrepreneurship is a great method of change. So if you want to enact change in your community, running a business is a really great way to do that and bring your life along. There we go. All right, so Outgrow Your Garage is the name of my company. We do, how do we get more businesses through their first growth stage and into stable business revenue? And we do that by teaching a lot of operational skills. So today, we are going to learn about the operational skill of building a hiring process. And if you have a good process, you have a better chance of getting the people that you want into your organization. So we're going to take 30 seconds, make a friend with your neighbor, and talk about where you are in your current hiring process. Are you hoping to hire? Are you about to scale? Are you dreaming of hiring one day when your business grows some more? Talk to your neighbor. What are your concerns? Where are you at? All right, I know that was very quick. Bring it on in. Focus on back up here. I'll just say words for a little bit. All right, so by a show of hands, How many people currently have staff on their team that they oversee? All right. How many people are hoping to hire within the next 6 months? How many people are hoping to hire within the next 6 weeks? All right. How many people dream of one day hiring and you have a lot of logistics to figure out before you get to that point? All right. We got a couple people in that category too. Some of this applies to hiring yourself, and some of this applies to hiring contractors as well. So as you think about it, if you're thinking about bringing anybody onto your team, whether that is recruiting your sibling to film your presentation at Denver Startup Week, to all the way to bringing on something like a virtual assistant or a contractor. So if you're thinking about bringing anybody into your business, a lot of these processes are how you would think about that in any capacity. So adapt as needed, ask questions. So why do you need a hiring process? If you went to Jen Grindelwald's talk on Monday about how to retain employees and talk about hidden differences within your staff, she mentioned a statistic that it costs 90 to 100% of an employee's salary to replace them, even more if that person is a C-suite executive. So keeping your good staff means you have a better company. If you know what you're trying to do, you have a better chance of success. If you have clear expectations, you have a better hiring process. If you know what you want and you look for the people that you want on your team and you hire with the goal that they will stay with you for a while, then you have a business that is stable. You are building internal operations. You are building long-term processes, client relations, a stable team, and that gives you more time and more money to do whatever it is you want to do with your business. So having that team in place that stays, this is the first step in that. Culture starts before you hire. How many of you have ever read a job description and it had a glaring red flag for you, whatever that red flag is, and you went, no, I'm not applying to that. That company does not have their act together. Don't be that company. You have the power to not do that. So part of what you do in this process is think about all the things you didn't like when you worked for other people, and then don't do those in your company. You get to be the change you want to see in the world here. So what we're going to talk about, your hiring process overview. You're going to make a plan. You're going to make a job description and a hiring matrix. You're going to vet and you're going to interview those candidates. You're going to make an offer. And then you're going to think about what comes next. You don't have to memorize all this. We're going to go through a very abbreviated version of this process. And then at the end, there's a nice little download for you that really blocks out all of those pieces and you can use to organize your hiring process. And you can download it, you can print it out, and that'll give you access to being able to create that on your own. So, section 1. Make a plan. So the things you need to do first are sit down and think about what you actually want. There's a bunch of decisions that you have to make before you hire. What is the position and what do you want them to do? What are you actually hiring for? When do you need them to start? Are you, I really needed them to start yesterday and I just need a warm body hiring process stage? Or are you, I know I need this position, I have some time to look around and really find the right candidate? Are you somewhere in the middle? What's the budget? Budget is key, and we'll talk about this as a separate thing here in a second. Who needs to be involved in the hiring process? As you scale, particularly if you are taking investment or using a recruiter, one of the biggest issues I see in hiring is that the person who is supervising this new position, the CEO of the company, the investor, if they're involved, and the recruiter are not on the same page about what that position does or who the ideal candidate is. So if your recruiter tells somebody, this job has X, Y, and Z duties, the CEO interviews them thinking that the job has P, Q, and R duties, and then when they show up on the first day, the actual supervisor of that position thinks they have A, B, and C duties, how long do you think that person is going to stay at the company? So you want to make sure everybody involved is on the same page. That is the single, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, take away that one. Because if you are starting in disagreement about what that role does, you are not going to have a successful hire, and that person is not going to stay at your company. How many of you have had that happen to you, where you got interviewed, thought you were hiring for another job, and then you showed up, it was something else? Yeah, don't do that. I see a lot of hands. So yeah, make sure that everybody agrees. So when you do budgeting, here are a couple of ways to think about what that budget is. So as you build in these different pieces, living wage guidelines. MIT has a great living wage calculator. It's broken down by county. It's not perfect, but it gives you an idea of don't pay less than this, because if people cannot afford to live or they need a second, third, fourth job in order to afford working at your company, they're not going to stay for very long. So if you can pay them enough that they can focus on their outside life and you have a better employee, right? Don't make your employees be burned out. What's the industry standard for that position? Are you going to pay them hourly or salary? Are you currently paying yourself? And in order to afford a new hire, does it make sense to cut some of your pay out and then channel that into billable paid hours for somebody else? So there's some really inventive ways to afford a new hire depending on what you need. We also have a cost of hiring workshop that helps you break out some of those costs. So shoot me an email at the end if you want access to that, or I can email you the slides and it has these links. So, like I said, make sure everyone in the process agrees on the job description, duties, and hiring requirements. Here's where we start the workshop. When you think about your organization, write down, we're going to take 30 seconds here, what position do you think your organization is going to hire next, and who needs to be involved in that process? Who are the stakeholders? All right. Job description. When you think about writing that job description for that position that you just identified in your head, is this an entry level, a mid-level, or a senior position? What are the types of experiences you need them to have? Who is going to manage them? Make sure that person is on your list from the first section. Direct managers should always be involved in discussing what those job duties are because they know what they want. What do you absolutely need this position to do? These are your non-negotiable job duties. If the person is not capable of doing these things, they are not qualified for the job. What do you want this position to do? I think the company is going in this direction. What are the things I kind of think would be nice for this position to have? These are where you negotiate. This is typically what you evaluate your preferred candidates on, the things you want. Other considerations you want to think about as you build these job descriptions. Where does this position fit into the overall area of your organization? How will you determine how they fit into your culture? What is the pay structure and the benefits? And when you think about this, right, in Colorado, you are legally required to put the pay in your job description. So when you think about that and you put that pay range in your job description, you put in the benefits, that's a great time to talk to your HR department, your benefits coordinator, whoever puts together that package for your new hires and sends them that information. Make sure they know you're hiring so that you can have that information ready to go when you make an offer. And we'll come back to that when we get to the offer point. But so many companies don't have that ready to go. And then you get a phone call and you say, I really want to offer you a job. And they say, great, what's my compensation and benefits package? HR will email that to you next week. Get that together in advance. You know what your budget is. You planned it out on the step one. So think about those types of process efficiencies that make that together. So when you put that in the job description, that's a great time to talk to HR about putting together a preliminary offer letter and package that you can just send out. make sure you know what those absolute maximums are. So there's the range that you list in the job description, and then there's your ideal candidate who meets every single thing that you could possibly want. Can you go outside that range? Is that an option, or is it not? Know that before the hiring process so that you can stick to it, whatever the answer for that is. And then you also want to think about, is this package equitable compared to similar positions at your organization and similar positions out in your industry in your area, right? And that may have some changes depending on how your business actually operates. But be realistic about what that is. And if you are not the person making those budgeting decisions, try and encourage them to be realistic about what they can offer. It's very easy to get excited and kind of get lost in the, oh yeah, we can do all these cool things. But write down your process and stick to it, and then you have a better chance for success. If you are hiring remotely, how are you thinking about remote pay considerations? There are a lot of ways to do this, and there are a lot of opinions on that. So how are you creating those equitable pay opportunities across geographic regions? Do you have a differential for living in a higher cost of living area? Do you pay everybody exactly the same, but you offer some funding for people to set up their work from home office? However you want to set it up, there's no right way to do it. There's just the way that works for your organization and feels fair to the people who work for you. I am a big fan of internally within your organization, equitable means, do the people you work with think it's fair? And so whatever process works for you, that's your internal one. And there's a lot of ways to increase equity in your hiring process around that, but fundamentally start with, do the people who work for you and do the people who are thinking about working for you think what you do is fair and reasonable? That's a good metric. So, in your notes, just like you need everyone to agree on the job duties, everyone involved in the interview process and everyone involved in evaluating that candidate should agree on it. So describe your ideal candidate for that position that you named above. What does that person look like? What skills do they have? How do they fit into the culture? What are the things that you really want them to do? And then you can order these priorities, right? And this is my favorite thing to think about when you, is that 8? I think that's 8. Yeah. When you think about what criteria you are evaluating this candidate on. Do they need prior experience in a similar position in your industry? Do they need prior experience in a similar position in a different industry? Related experience in a different position or industry? Are you hiring from outside your industry and bringing somebody in to shake things up? Do they have experience in a skill that is currently lacking? Are they a really good culture fit? Are they a personality fit within your existing team? Does the lead or team supervisor want to work with this candidate? So take a minute, describe your ideal candidate, and for that position, put this list in order. What is the most important thing in that position to least important thing? How would you weight an application? All right, we'll take about 30 more seconds there. course I missed one. Is that person enthusiastic about your company mission and goals? And that's a really good trigger for, are they going to fit in your culture? If somebody is not excited about what your company does, don't bring them on. At least not at the beginning. It's fine when you have 5,000 employees and you need somebody to be an entry-level call center employee. I don't think I've ever met an entry-level call center employee who's really excited about Chase's mission to be a bank. They don't need to be. But in those early hires, you want somebody who's pretty jazzed about what you're doing. So once you have decided on your process, who needs to be involved, what you're actually trying to do, you've got your goals, you have this job description, you've gotten in some applications, you have to sort those applications and you got to interview your candidates. So when you look at those resumes, what are your evaluation criteria? Hint, you just put them in order in that last slide. You know what you're looking for. How are you evaluating them? Everyone involved in the process should agree on what that list is and how they want to do it, because that's the second place that your hiring process is most likely to fail, is you will miss good candidates if not everybody on the team agrees on what you're looking for and how you will evaluate that. So what is most important? Some people are going to want somebody to come in and not have any training and be able to just pick up those job duties, which, spoilers, nobody will ever come in and need zero training because nobody knows your process in advance. Everybody needs some training. But are you looking for somebody who can really do those hard skills? Are you looking for more of a culture fit? What is that evaluation criteria and how are you determining it? Are there any candidates that are recommended by your current staff? I would say in 100% of cases, if somebody on your current team says, this person I know applied and you should interview them, you should interview them. Bump them to the head of the queue, guarantee an interview. The exception to this is the person who recommended them is your worst employee that you can't quite fire yet. Maybe not take that one. Or give that person the interview anyway, and then you just kind of know you're not going to hire them and you've kept the peace for a little longer. But a good way to create resentment in your current staff is if they're bringing you potential team members and you're not giving them interviews. I have known people leave positions over that of, my opinion's not valued at work. And one of the ways I know this is when I say this person would make a great addition to the team and their application never gets out of the HR black hole. So don't do that. Have a system for that. Have multiple people look at the candidates. If you know what your evaluation criteria is, you know what you're looking for, people with different experiences will catch different stuff. So if you're hiring a project manager and somebody is moving out of a different industry and they want to do project management and they've never managed a tech team before, they've never done project management for a tech thing, but they have done restaurant management and retail management and had a remote job that was at a startup, they probably have a lot of the pieces that they need in order to wrangle squirrels. If you've ever been in a restaurant at busy hour, you're wrangling squirrels. Running an engineering team is a lot like wrangling squirrels. So having multiple people look at those resumes, you'll catch things like that because somebody will have had that experience and go, actually, they don't have experience in this industry, but they do have related things that we can put together. We should give them an interview. One of the people who reviews the candidates should always be the direct supervisor of that candidate. They'll have an idea of what they're looking for. And understanding if you need experienced candidates or that you're willing to train. All people will need some training, and the other thing that's true is as your organization grows, you want to figure out a way to put professional development and growth into that process because people like to learn at the jobs they're in. They like to have upward mobility, but also because if you only ever hire experienced candidates and everybody else in your industry only ever hires experienced candidates, 10 years from now, no one will have hired entry-level positions and you will not have new experienced candidates. So having a path of upward mobility and growth in your organization as you grow, build that in. You want to train eventually. When you interview, the first interview, right? A lot of us have more than one interview. The first interview determines, does this person understand what they're applying for? Is the job they want actually the job that we want to hire for? Is this person capable of doing the job? Do they meet the things we absolutely need? And will they potentially fit into our culture? That's your evaluation criteria. And then you pick whatever your top candidates are from that, however you set that up. Those are your key questions. You're just weeding out at that point. Then you do your second interview. Your second interview determines, do we actually want to work with them? Let's learn a little bit more. We've decided that they're in our top 10. We want to learn a little more here. Do they want to work with us? And that's a huge question. How many of you have rejected a job offer because when you talked to the company, you went, no, I don't want to work with these people. Looked good on paper, not in practice. So these interviews are your chance to say, this is how we operate. Come work for us. We're pretty cool. So that first and second interview help you feel that out. I am a big advocate of anything after that first interview, you pay for people's time. And this is a really unpopular opinion. It's actually probably the most unpopular opinion I hold. But within this culture we operate right now, there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out what companies are going to value my time. A really good way to demonstrate to employees that you are as committed to your staff as your staff is to you is paying for their time starting in the interview process. Because in that interview, it takes time. Sometimes people will do a full day where somebody has to take time off their current job. They may or may not have to travel somewhere. And then they have to spend a whole day talking to people they don't know. That is really stressful on a lot of people, right? So pay them for that time. Show that you value that. The other thing you can do is have interviews happening outside normal business hours. The assumption that everyone is able to take time off from their current job in order to come to an interview may not be true for a lot of people. So having interview times at different times, accommodating people in different time zones, any of those kinds of pieces, it helps build that trust that you value your staff. So when you do the questions, my favorite question is, what do you think you're interviewing for? And this tells me a couple of things. I start every interview I do, regardless of position, seniority level, anything. That's the first question I ask at every single interview. What do you think you're interviewing for? It tells me, did you read the job description? Are the things that you picked up out of that job description the things that I want you to have gleaned? How well did I write it? What are the things that you're interested in from that job description? And also, it's my first metric of, can this person think independently, or do I have to tell them what to do every second? And so it lets me evaluate where they are on that scale, and I can fit that into what I need for that position. Here is a specific situation that happens a lot in this job. How would you solve it? Tells you a lot about how that person thinks about how to do those duties. This job involves a lot of this thing that is whatever is the most annoying thing that the job entails. When I worked in landscaping, I always said, this job involves a lot of working outside in 100-degree weather in the sun. How do you like being outside in the sun for 8 hours? Doing manual labor. So whatever the thing is that's hardest about the job, how do you handle it? Other ones that I like are, what work environments do you like? Who do you like working with? These open-ended questions that tell you about the candidate, but also give you the information you need from that list of evaluation criteria. How do you solve this? What do you like to do? Who do you like to work with? And then do those answers mesh with what you're trying to get to? Hiring family members. I always like to acknowledge this. How many of you have ever hired a family member or a close friend? How many of you had a really great experience with that? And how many were like, that was a little rough after a while, right? Like, you know, you do those things. Treat them like you would any other applicant. And you want to talk about what happens with the business if there's a family emergency. How do you handle giving feedback? And how do you keep work issues from interfering with family stuff and family stuff from interfering with work things, right? When you go to a family event, don't talk shop all the time. When you're at work, don't talk about the family the whole time. You know, so really, what are those boundaries? So I like to acknowledge that that's a lot of our first hire. So managing those. So in your pondering for this, what are some interview questions? There we go. Look at that priority list. Think about what you want out of this imaginary position we're building here. And what is an interview question that you want to ask to find out more about that most important thing on your list? Is it skills-based? Is it culture fit? So for example, if you really want a personality that fits with the existing team, what's your communication style? How do you like to be talked to at work? And then you look at your team and you look at that answer and you go, do they match? So come up with an interview question or two. We'll take a minute on this. And if you are super confused, ask a question and we'll work through it as a group. And I know there's a ton of information on these slides, and so I am happy to send them to you after the presentation. That's absolutely fine. So if you're one of the people taking pictures of every slide, that's great. Also, I can email them to you, and you can have them. When you get to that offer and negotiation stage, pre-write your offer letter. You already know what the job duties are. You wrote them in the description. You determined your budget and benefits. You have theoretically already talked to HR about how you're planning to hire and gotten all that paperwork done. Your benefit packages are going to be fairly standard per position, so you can have all that written out in advance. And then you fill in the initial compensation offering and the preferred start date. And so you have all that information, which makes that process really smooth. Anything you can prep in advance makes all of this time easier when you're interviewing candidates and you're vetting candidates and you're going, what did I want again? Oh, but why do I really like this person? Oh no, now we need this benefits package over here and we have to figure out how to call them. All of these different pieces. If you have it all written down in advance, that's a lot easier to remember what you need to do. The other thing that's nice about doing this pre-written offer letter, benefits package, compensation stuff is that if your HR person is sick in the middle of your offer process, you don't have to wait for them to get better. How many of you have ever had a job offer that is held up because the person you're supposed to talk to is out? Right? That's not ideal. Don't be that company. You can do a lot of this in advance. Negotiations, same thing. Know that budget, know that maximum budget, and know who can make changes to that. You want to have decided that well before you get to the negotiation stage. So when that candidate comes back and says, actually, can we negotiate an extra $10,000 a year into my compensation? You already know whether the answer to that question is yes or no, because it's somewhere in the salary range that you agreed on in advance, or it's something that you already do for another candidate or however those things work. Who has the approval to make changes and what's pre-planned? Give the hiring manager decision-making authority to know what's possible and what's not. If you have a 5 or 10 person company and every hire has to go through the CEO and the CEO is really busy looking for funding and meeting with clients, that's really hard to get that done. So make sure that the person who is actually talking to the candidate has that decision-making authority. They know the budget constraints. They know what the guidelines are for negotiating. They have a good idea of what the preferred outcome is, and anything within that box, they can just go ahead and sign off on. And then they know who to go to if the hiring manager is unavailable, or if there's an oddball question. I have to pick up my kid from preschool every Tuesday at 11:15. Can I build that into my work schedule? I mean, probably. At a lot of places, that's totally fine. But if they want that written in their contract, the hiring manager may not know whether or not that's possible because they're not going to know that actually there's a team meeting at 11:30 every day that's mandatory for everybody because that's when they determine their quarterly priorities or overview important announcements. And that meeting would have to move to accommodate that. Maybe that meeting can move, maybe not. But that's not something that a hiring manager is necessarily going to know. So really working on, here's the box, anything within the box can be approved. Speeds up your process, makes everything easier. So when you think about that, is there somebody at your company who is available outside of work hours to answer phone calls and emails about the offer? Who is the person that would need to understand all of those negotiating capacities? And who is responsible for writing those offer letters, sending them out? When they're out of the office, who does it instead? And if there is no backup plan, who do you talk to about building that backup plan? So take about 30 seconds and write down your next set of things that are common failure points in hiring processes. You don't want to give somebody time to accept a second job offer because your process is so wonderfully smooth. They say, man, the person I was talking to got sick, and I got an email from another person who said, person A is out sick, I'm your person until they're back. They were just so on top of it. I totally want to work for them. It's awesome. All right. And then you get to the first day, right? You have gone through all of this amazing process. You have a great candidate. They do all of the things you want. They're so impressed with your process and how easy everything was and how much value you demonstrated, how much respect you demonstrated for them as a candidate. They're really jazzed about your mission. They're so qualified. And then they show up on the first day. When you get ready for that process, make sure you know what forms they need to fill out. What does their supervisor need to have set up and ready to go for them? You want to set up meetings with the key team members. Do that in advance. What's that schedule? So that when they show up on the first day, they go, okay, we're going to talk to these people. Here's your schedule. Give them an easy win. Have a project that can be completed in a couple days within that first week that's related to the job, where they can show off what they can do to other people at your company and on the team. So you can go, great, here's your first week. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to do this project. We're going to meet these people. We're going to get these documents filled out. We're going to set up this stuff. And they go, man, y'all really have it together. This is awesome. I'm really excited I came to work for this company. So in that imaginary candidate you do, who are the most important people for that imaginary candidate position that you get to know them in that first week? Who do they need to talk to? And so take 10 seconds and write that down. All right, congratulations. In roughly 35 minutes, you've designed an entire hiring process that works for your company. Nice work, not bad for a morning. So, things to remember. Does everyone involved agree on your essential hiring duties, those essential job descriptions, and what you're going to evaluate them on? Follow the same process for all your candidates. You spent all this work developing one, so do that for every candidate. Prep everything you can in advance. One of the other things I like to add in that prep is, since you know all of your interview questions in advance, email them to your candidates when you send out that interview schedule. Hey, we want to set up an interview with you. We've confirmed you at this time. Here's the list of interview questions we're going to send you, this is probably my second most unpopular opinion. Unless you are hiring for a position in which somebody has to think rapidly with self-awareness, under pressure, there is no need for you to make people do that and make the interview process more stressful. Let them prepare. You will get better answers. It will be more thoughtful answers. They'll be able to comb through their work history and come up with a specific situation that meshes with the thing you're looking for. They'll be able to really think about, oh, how do I like to work? Let me ponder this. Let me ask somebody who I've worked with before. Let me talk about this, right? You'll get better answers if people know what to expect. How many of you have a better time in life when you know what to expect going into a situation? Your job candidates are not any different. So tell them what to expect. So that's another thing I really like to add into this part. So what happens next? If you want more information, we have this profit to process hiring for success option. It's at this QR code. At that QR code, you fill out the little form. We email it to you, so it's nice in your inbox, downloadable stuff. It has all of that stuff that we just went through in this presentation written out in a handy little guide with checklists and accountability options and trade secret tips for how to do that specific stage. It is set up exactly like those stages we just went through, and all of those things in that criteria are in that list of things that you need to do. So if you want it all written down in a handy guide where you can fill in due dates, there's your QR code. If you liked this workshop and you want to book another one, there's our book us page. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and you can shoot me an email. Oh, we'll leave that there, which is just Jesse@outgrowyourgarage.com. I'm happy to give you a card too. So if you want me to email you the slides, let me know. Questions? Yeah.
So a lot of this talks a little bit more later on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
How would you adopt this if you're hiring your first person and you don't have an HR department, you don't have any of these pieces set up yet?
So think about what you need. What gets stress off your plate? And start there, right? So you're still going to go through all of these processes, right? But instead of calling your HR person to write a benefits letter, you write down, here are the benefits I can offer, right? I have a 2-person company. We don't really have any benefits, but when I write that job description, our benefits are flexible work schedule, fully remote position, cost of living pay increases every year, and so we just kind of talk about it. And then I have an HR consultant. There is a lot of them around. If you need an HR consultant who can look at your stuff and make sure that what you're doing is legal within the bounds of Colorado and federal law, that's really all you need. And there's a lot of people out there willing to do that. But you'll still go through that same process of, what do I need? What do I want? Is that thing realistic? You still want to have a process. And then as you scale and grow, you build on that process. It's so much easier to have an early stage process that doesn't have every single necessary piece and then add them in as you get bigger than it is to go, oh God, I just got funded and now I can hire 10 people and suddenly I need a process, right? I built a hiring process for a company that had just gotten their Series A funding and needed to hire 30 engineers in the next 8 months, senior level engineers. They had no hiring process. Their VP of engineering had never hired that many people before. We built a hiring process. They got the people they needed. It worked. But you gotta have the process. But if they'd had a hiring process before that, it would have been a lot easier.
I know you mentioned like making sure you're paying for people outside of that first interview. From like a legal perspective, would that be someone who's like, is that like a 1099 pay? Yeah, okay.
Yes, you set it up like a 1099 contractor pay,
Okay.
and then it just doesn't factor into their thing. It's like a one-time event payment, right?
Okay.
Where you just say, okay, here's the pieces. In an ideal world, you keep it less than $600 so that you don't even have to send the 1099. But my rule of thumb on that is whatever the pay scale for the position is, that's what you pay that second interview at, because then they know they can make that criteria of, do I want to do this job for this amount of money? They have that really clear, particularly in a position with high turnover. Yeah.
I find it really interesting that you say to send the questions in advance because the majority of questions that you're asked in interviews repeat themselves, and you can find most of them online and prepare in advance. And I've helped a lot of people prepare for interviews before, and I find that like if you're very invested, you should be preparing that in advance on your own, and it's not very hard to figure that out by yourself, and it shows that you are like really proactive, that you took the time to practice with maybe a friend or a colleague or something like that.
I mean, sure, but also there's a big list of questions that you could potentially prepare for, and you want your candidate to come prepared with the information that you want to hear. And so there is that give and take of, yes, some people can absolutely spend a boatload of time prepping for interviews. Some people are looking to get out of an overworked, burned out job, and they haven't interviewed for a while. Maybe you're the first interview they're doing in that space, right? They're trying to get out of a job where they've been working 80 hours a week and their boss is terrible and they're burned out and they're exhausted. And so you just sending a little email, it's already in the form template that says this is when your conversation or this is when your interview is scheduled, and I've attached this list of interview questions. It takes you less than 2 seconds to do that as a person who's sending out the confirmations. And you get that little more of, oh, this company cares about me. I'm a little more invested in this interview, right? We are very much in a job market right now where employers have to attract people and they have to work to keep them. So having that little bit of care of, yes, a lot of these questions are things you're going to be asked in every interview, but if you're setting your interview questions up right, you're actually not asking a lot of those standard questions because you've tailored your questions to the information you want to get. And so it goes in both directions on that. But even if they are pretty standard, what's the harm in emailing them in advance? There's a lot of upside and very little downside. Yeah.
So I've seen it recently where an employer sent out to one of my clients questions, and then they said, then we'll have 3 or 4 additional questions to see how you think on your feet.
Right.
Which I thought was a fabulous combination
Mm-hmm.
of both things, which gave them an opportunity to really hone in on, I need somebody who can think on their feet.
Right. And that's a great way to do that, right? If the position requires a lot of on-the-spot, intense thinking, don't send the questions in advance because you want to know how somebody does on-the-spot, intense thinking. But if the position doesn't require that, then you don't need to do that. So really thinking about what's the connection of that and why are you asking the questions that you're asking? Somebody else had a, yeah.
I have companies ranging from startups to Fortune 100 build teams, and something we wrestle with internally and we hear from our clients is how easy the digital platforms have made it to apply. And somebody puts a job, and 24 hours later you have 500 applicants.
Mm-hmm.
Any suggestions of how to sort through that? Because you're missing on a lot of really great applicants if you're not going through every single one.
I don't have a good thing with that. One of the things that I have really worked on with that is being intentional about where you post things. And so looking at, okay, if you are only hiring people who have to live within the US, is there a way to toggle that automated form that says, yes, I live in the US, and then just filter out every other candidate? So kind of have some of those pieces, but you're right. And so one of the things I do is I don't ever post jobs on LinkedIn. Like I just don't, because you get exactly that. So being intentional about how you do it and slow rolling it, one platform, and then 2 weeks later a different platform, and so you have to kind of play with it. Yeah.
What is a kind of a follow-up question on that? Are there any particular platforms that you recommend more so posting on there for quality candidates? And then my original question was, is there a good percentage of like senior developers versus newer developers, junior developers that you should be maintaining? So you're like building people up later on, but also making sure you have quality.
Yeah, so those are 2 super great questions. To answer the first one, if I want to know where I'm finding high quality candidates in my industry and in my field, I ask somebody else I know and like in my field, and I say, hey, you just hired, what worked for you? That's honestly like, talk to the people in your field and ask what's working for them because it changes all the time. And it's very dependent on your industry, company size, all of those different pieces. And then in terms of that proportion of junior people to more senior people, when you are young and new and a baby company and you do not have time to do a lot of training, you hire more senior people. As you grow your company, by the time you get to somewhere in that 5 to 10 range, people, total people in your company, is when you want to start thinking about what that ratio should look like for your company and how that fits into overall growth goals. So it really depends on the specific company, but it should be on your radar. By the time you have 30 people, you should have a clear pipeline. We can hire an entry-level candidate. Here's how we grow them up. Here's our mentorship program. We're doing some management training, particularly for anybody who's never managed before. We're a really big fan of this person's really good at their job, so let's make them a manager, but we won't give them any training in management. Don't do that. So you want to build that in of what that professional development looks like, but every company is going to have a slightly different ratio depending on what their deadlines are, what their product is, and how much of the culture is a learning culture where people are wanting to learn and grow all the time. So that's a little bit of an easier bite of create a learning culture. We built professional development into our process. And then now it's easy to bring people in and train them up to where we want to because all of our processes are good. But I would say by 30, you want to have a good range of people at all levels of your organization.
I really love what you said about once you found that person and they start working on the first day, giving them an easy win is a great way to start and keep that people for the first month. Because I found we lose a lot of people in that first month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that can be anything. Look at what the job description is and look at something you need done that's easy. So if they're a marketing person, we need our newsletter redesigned. Can you do the next month's worth of newsletter? Just tweak, here's an old one, tweak it, we need a couple new template formats. Whatever that is. If they're an engineer, hey, here's this old bit of code, it needs to be tweaked. We need to do this quick update thing, it'll take a couple hours, whatever. Just a little project, let them have a win. So we are 5 minutes past time. I'll call it here. If you have other questions, I'll hang about and come find me if you need things.